the operation of the colonialists, the way they invaded Africa, and they came and they violently took our land. They took our property. They decimated us. They took us all the way to land, almost landmines, to the rocks and all that, while they took our very fertile and productive land. They have taken it for, even after independence, they have continued to have those properties, and they are sitting on them as with thousands and thousands of acres are still in the hands of surrogates of colonialism and colonialists, and they took them violently. Now, the debate since independence has been we want back our land, but they want us to massage them, to give them back our land. They took it violently. Our own property, they took it violently, but for them to give it back to us, we need to massage them and tell them, oh, guy, don't worry, we are sorry, just give back our land. For over 50 years right now, we're still struggling with the things that you are fighting for right now, about the land of the land of the Kipsigis, the land of the Nandis and the Tamais, who up to date are still living in those areas that were put by the colonialists. While the same land that we are fighting over, we are saying colonialism is over. The imperialists have gone, but they still exist within us in terms of marginalization of property. You know, the land that they took from us is still with them. And the conversation is, for how long are you going to massage them? Is it time we use the same tactic that they used? Because they took the land violently. Is it time we also took it violently? Instead of massaging them to give them back to me, back to us. It's like someone, John was saying at that time, someone steals your car. And you go and find him with a car, but you tell him now, you know, I'm a very man, I have a lot of manners, I'm going to drop you home. You tell the thief, I'm going to drop you home, then you'll give me my car. The discussion is, you took our land, you took it violently. Why should we massage you to give back our property? And since you've not done it for the last 54 years, is it time then that we employ the same tactics that you employed when you took the land from us?
I have to, as a lawyer and even a retired judge, I have to disagree. There is, in a sense, a time for the struggle to turn violent. Mm-hmm. But that generally leads to great suffering. Mm-hmm. And it pits African against African, whilst the colonialist sits pretending to be the victim. Mm-hmm. So it is really not advantageous. These days, you have the means of powerful but peaceful change. You can have direct action, which is peaceful protest, and there are times to deploy that. And certainly that is something that we may look at in the future. But certainly what took place, say, for instance, in Zimbabwe, was, in a sense, sometimes could be seen as counterproductive. It is important to use and exhaust all the peaceful means, lawful means you have, and they can be effective, extremely effective. When you sue a multinational, Cargill, for instance, is a partner of Unilever. When you sue them in Minnesota at their headquarters, and you have a demonstration outside their headquarters in Minnesota and in Kericho and outside the headquarters in Unilever, and it goes on CNN, you watch their share price plummet. You know, these multinationals are about money. If they're not making money, they will go. And there are ways to reduce their leverage. And, you know, in the War of Liberation in South Africa, the least known thing is that actually the Cubans in Cuito-Cuanavale in southern Angola beat the South African army. And they not only beat the South African army, they drove down the security of investors. And eventually it was the bankers in New York, Zurich, and London and Frankfurt that called time on apartheid. And that was because of the liberation struggle. But it was the economics and the power of that that really made those whites settle. Some settlement, not all of it, because they still own, I think, 86% of the land in South Africa, which is, again, a travesty which Julius Malema and others will have to tackle in due course. But peaceful acquisition, peaceful change, but provided it is swift. I'm certainly not suggesting that we sit here for another 20 or 50 years whilst these colonialists sit here, whilst we just go to the cinema and watch Wakanda and dream.
As we pick at and demonstrate. Anyway, the first question, my last question is, when you talk about acquisition of property, it's about buying. Most of these properties that people sit on and they call private property is not private because they never bought. There's no records that actually paid for the land. Every other time you find a black man aggressing for land justice, they tell you cannot trespass private property. A private property does not have an history of purchase. You know, when you look at Africans, they never had title deeds. It was communal. This is our property. This is our boundary. We use it. So how do we differentiate between private property and property that was acquired illegally? Because if you did not buy it, I cannot tell you this is my property. I never bought it. Just because I have documents for it does not mean it belongs to me. When do we start having this conversation of public land and private property and the law? Because law says you cannot take away private property. On matters land, what is private and what isn't?
Well, we had a meeting recently with His Excellency, the Governor, the Ambassador for Morocco. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that differentiates the history of Morocco from the history of Kenya is that on independence, every single piece of land that was occupied and titled to the French colonialists became government land, and it was then redistributed. One of the settlements that the British forced on Kenya was that the settlers and their surrogates in Kenya maintained the so-called dubious and false title of land in Kenya, which is what we're sitting with today. But that, I think you've hit the nail on the head. If, in a sense, there is not a mechanism, and the 2010 Constitution only spoke of land that was currently held by foreigners having a limitation of 99 years. But when did that start? The governor of Kericho has demanded that the multinationals give back the titles, deeds. So far, none of the multinationals have responded to the correspondence. In fact, they respond in an arrogant manner and dismissive and say effectively, well, these concern proprietary rights and we're simply not going to give them to you. And they require a court order to do so. Those conversations must be heard and must be held immediately. And if they're not, the pressure must be piled on. And you know, one of the things that it has led to in Laikipia and other parts of Kenya is guns being turned on those who have a lawful right to access that land. I was on a public road. Dr. Mordecai Ogada was threatened with rifles as a conservationist when he simply went to use a public road in Laikipia County. Those incidents are a travesty. It cannot happen. And you cannot pretend that you're conserving rhinoceros and elephants, which were conserved by indigenous people for thousands of years, and then seek to designate all those local people as somehow poachers that have to be kept off the land by force, land that you acquired by force to boot. So there has to be, in a sense, a vigorous campaign. And it may well be that at some point there is some test case whereby land is reoccupied by indigenous people. And by indigenous people, I mean by all Kenyans. And the as you know, a prosecution for trespass, if it arises, you cannot trespass land which is yours. And therefore the purported owners have to produce those title deeds to prove that you are indeed a trespasser. So there are many and varied means of skinning this particular cat. But the cat either has to be skinned or it has to go or boiled. But it has to leave.